Welcome to another episode of In the Nude. Sorry, there's a bee outside the window. Today we're going to be talking about one of the biggest problems that we face when we're healing, self-abandonment. This is not like super fun topic, and it integrates into so much of our day-to-day life. We self-abandon in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different facsimiles, and we do it, and it's completely reasonable and rational why we do it. We're picking up on the modeled behavior around us. We're picking up on lies that we think are truth. Let's break down what I mean by self-abandonment, right? This can show itself in a lot of different ways. This can be you showing up and trying to be the caretaker of the people around you and then self-abdicating from dealing with your own feelings and all that because you're just getting busy. It can be trying to people please, which is slightly different than caretaking, right? It can be you're trying to constantly make people like you because you feel like if they like you, then you're going to have worth, but then you're completely emptying yourself to be around those people around you. But there's also other ways that it comes up, like intellectualizing your feelings, right? You have a feeling and then you stop and you go like, well, why is that happening? Like, what is the reason or the purpose that I have this feeling? Or even if you don't go that far, if you're sitting there and you're just thinking through and intellectualizing, oh, I'm doing this because of this, because of this, because of this, but understanding it, but not ever coming to a place of like just sitting with yourself with it. There's so many different ways that we self-abdicate in our day-to-day life, but it's the unwinding of that. So instead of sitting here and saying whack-a-mole to all these different aspects and avenues in which we self-abdicate, if you understand and comprehend and see yourself leaving yourself behind, right? Whether it's you run away from the feeling to escape, or you intellectualize your feeling, or you are constantly emptying yourself to try to make other people like you, or fill in the blank, right? Any of those many different like minutia of ways that we self-abdicate. Let's talk about how we come back to ourselves. What are some tangible things that we can do to help us unwind those habits? First off, I want to acknowledge and like make space for the fact it's completely reasonable that we've gotten into these patterns. Not only is it because of it was the way to survive, to appease other people, make them happy, but it's also the patterns of behavior we saw and accepted as truths, right? Our opinions and values and feelings didn't matter there from other people. Therefore, why would it matter for us? We had to rationalize and give reasons and excuses and thought process and defend ourselves. So why wouldn't we? We weren't believed. So why do we believe ourselves? Like all of the reasons we do the things we do are completely, like they make sense. If you sit down and look at the context of your life, it makes sense. So there's no reason for shame. There's no reason for denigration. There's no reason for hate or like you can be frustrated if you want to, but there's frustration and attack of yourself for having responded to stimulus around you in a natural way is kind of fruitless. So right now, let's start with some self-compassion. It's a reasonable connection for you to have lived through what you lived through and coped with it in the way that you did. You're now trying to rectify that and like adjust things and be able to be yourself more wholly, and that's wonderful and beautiful and fantastic. High five you. But let's start with the self-compassion. It makes sense. It's reasonable. It was the safe choice. We're just making new safety. Some of the things that I have found and coming back to myself is based on like the trigger of what causes you to self-abdicate, right? If you spent most of your life feeling like you had to justify yourself, right? And so you self-abdicate by making yourself have to have rational reasons for a feeling or intellectualizing your feelings instead of actually feeling them. Part of the way you're going to come back to yourself is stair-stepping, doing things that will like help you get there. But it's ultimately going to be having to accept the thing that's really, really difficult, because it's honestly most of the time what's true. The thing that's the antithesis of what is become your nature. It wasn't your nature innately, but because of your coping mechanisms, what became your nature, it's going to be the antithesis of that, because you're having to counteract this. Like, imagine like healthy is in this like middle balance, right? In this middle range of like swaying around this midline. When we live in a healthy traumatic environment, we pendulum swing to one side or to the other. And when we do that, in order to come back towards the middle, we're going to have to go counter to what has become our nature of coping. So if you intellectualize your feelings, it's going to be likely your body's going to come up with a lot of feelings and a lot of history that's been inside your body and doesn't have a reason or a purpose. And you're going to have to learn how to have self-compassion for yourself without having justification. Sitting there and saying to yourself out loud, if you need to, for me that was needed, it's okay. You feel this. We don't have to know why. It doesn't make it any less real if we don't know why it's happening. It's real and it's happening, and we're just going to sit with it. Sometimes after that happens, the reasoning or thought process or connection might come through, but sometimes it won't. But stair steps to how to get there, because you can't instantaneously go from intellectualization to feeling that, is it's gonna be scientific method of testing to see what works. But small things, like when you have that process of intellectualization, paying attention to and observing the way that your brain thinks without judging yourself. This can be done with journaling. This can be done with intentional thought. This can be done in a lot of different ways, but it's observing what is. We can't adjust, we can't redirect without seeing and accepting and knowing what is, right? Like, you spill a drink, you don't get a new drink without first accepting the fact that the drink was spilled, right? If you're constantly being like, no, I still have a drink, you're never going to get a new one, right? Same concept, but with this. So observing where you are without judgment whenever possible, with compassion and grace whenever possible, and having grace and compassion with yourself when you aren't capable of giving yourself that grace and compassion. But observing what is a great baseline. Even if you can't do anything else with it, just seeing where you are. And then you can even have feelings that exist as a result of noticing what's happening, and then making space to be like, okay, that's a lot. I don't know if I want to deal with it, but like observing you do have feelings in response to you intellectualizing and judging yourself for having feelings, right? There isn't like a path that's going to work well, but that acknowledgement, awareness is a great first step for you if you're further along in the process. Things that have helped me once I was aware what was going on, started having feelings of it, but still had a tendency towards intellectualization, is the verbally saying out loud, it's okay to not have a reason. And then thinking about myself like another person, right? Like splitting my brain in two, right? I have me now as a person, and then I have this other part of me that's feeling this feeling. And thinking through, how would I respond if this was my child having a feeling like this? What would I do if this was my best friend having this feeling? Would I sit there and try to solve it for them? Would I sit there and try to have them justify it? And I would literally view myself as both myself, but also another person, and then start communicating and sitting with them. So like in my brain, create a room, create a couch, and there's me as the person who's aware of what's going on. And then there's the other part of me that is feeling the feeling, and a visualization of me just sitting down and existing in that feeling with them. Being uncomfortable, like when somebody else is having a really big feeling and you're uncomfortable, right? And just, yeah, that sucks. It's fair. Like verbalizing out loud the things that I would to a friend, the things that I would to my child. But that's how that helps me. Maybe you're not a visual person. Maybe you go about it in a different way. Maybe you're journaling. Maybe you draw. Maybe you release your feelings through exercise. There's a lot of different ways and modalities in which that can help. But coming back to ourselves is really important. So let's talk about another way, another path, right? Okay, so say, for example, you abdicate yourself with people pleasing, right? You tend to be a fawn, whether that's caretaking of the person or if it's just appeasing them and making them happy. One, again, awareness of what you're doing, right? Even if you can't be aware of it in the moment, if you're retroactively observing and seeing the behavior that happened today, right? And you're like, man, I really didn't want to make that choice, but I did make that choice because I want to make that person happy, but it wasn't what was best for me. Seeing it with grace and compassion, but looking back and like noticing what is. Even better if you can do it in the moment, but a lot of times that's hard. That's like a first step. Again, acknowledging where we are and having compassion and grace when we can, and having compassion and grace when we can't have compassion and grace for ourselves for judgment. Stopping ourselves in the cycle of the judgment, like at some point, because I definitely have been that person where I'm sitting there and I'm judging myself, and then I judge myself for judging myself, and then I judge myself for having judged myself because you see the cycle, right? At some point, there's got to be a stopgap. At some point, we have to, well, yeah, that wasn't the most great thing. Wish that didn't happen. But anyway, so observing what is, but proactively before you come to a situation where you're going to be dealing with people that you have a tendency to, right? Like say you have family members that have, or old friends that have this habit of knowing you to be a person that will empty themselves to like fill the other person. One, maybe you need to have less time spent with that person. If you don't have the like fortification and strength to show up as a different person yet with them, maybe there's space that's needed. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you don't love them. It means that you're protecting yourself. It means that you're loving yourself too. And it's not a degradation against them necessarily. I mean, it could be, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It means that you matter enough to create that space. Other things that you can do is in advance, think through and take actions to prove to yourself that you are people too, right? We're supposed to love people. We're people. You're people. Like, it doesn't mean other people. It means people, and you're included in that people. So doing things for yourself, which may come as, oh, shocking, complete counter to your nature because of what you have coped with and dealt with. It wasn't always against your nature, but it is right now when we're trying to come back to balance, right? So things like you really want to have this particular thing, but you wouldn't buy it for yourself normally because, you know, it's not needed or whatever. Or maybe you want to go to the beach for a day trip for yourself, but you're like, man, that's like wasteful. There's so many things I could get done. Or you want to read and just want someone to take your kids or whatever it is. Realizing you don't need to prove or work for or gain the value enough to take care of yourself, the value enough to rest, the value enough to take up space. Doing things uncomfortably to prove to yourself you have value. Again, for me, this had to show up like me splitting myself into two people. Me as who I am right now, and me as this other entity, right? That is still me, but like inside of my brain. My brain's weird. Maybe this will help you or not, but like for me, I visualize myself as like two different people. The person right now who's aware of the situation, has seen what it is, and the person who's still acting as the people pleaser, as the caretaker, as the self-abdicating person, right? And then thinking of them like my kid, thinking of them like my best friend. And when it comes to the question of like, I'm sitting there in my car and I've just finished a business meeting. This literally recently happened. I was at the beach. I was taking a business meeting. And then directly afterwards, I wanted to go to the beach just to put my feet in the sand, just to listen. But it wasn't practical. It wasn't like the most effective and efficient use of my time. And so I sat there in the car debating myself. The one side of me, the unhealed version of me that is trying to like achieve value, productivity, all of that. I sat there and I was like, no. We just need to drive back because we have other things we need to get done. We need to make sure we're, making best use of this time, this day, like being effective, efficient, all of that. And the other part of me that is, you're a person. We're here. While it may not be the most productive in the sense of capitalism viewpoint, doing something that you enjoy just for the enjoyment is productive. It's okay for you to take up space. It's okay for you to do something you like. And of course, the argument continued, and eventually the healed version of me having the argument with the unhealed version of me, I stopped and I turned and I said, if this was fill in the blank with the person I love's name, and they wanted to just go to the beach, would you at all question that choice? For me, no. If my kid, if my friend wanted to go to the beach and we were there, I would be appalled if someone was trying to combat the idea of going to the beach for an hour just to enjoy the water, enjoy the sand, enjoy the sitting and listening. After way longer than I would have hoped it happened, that I finally chose to take care of myself, to take up space. It's still a journey. It's still a battle for me to show up and not self-abdicate. But it's that truth. It's that looking at yourself like you are people too, that you have care too. And for me, that takes and literally requires me to almost split myself into two minds, because if I don't, then I'm going to end up going into the habit and behaviors and patterns that I have before, which does not lend itself to a different end. If I just default, I'm going to stay where I've been or even retreat back further from where I've healed. I have to be purposeful. I have to be intentional. I have to question and push, which is uncomfortable. And I have I have battling natures within me. I have the one that is like seeing the benefits and the movement and the forward positive effects of peace and joy in taking up space and being a person and enjoying life and viewing things. And then I have the other part of me that is just so default ingrained because of 3 decades of living the way that I have. So it's still, it's going to be a arduous process at times, but it's an arduous process that's worthwhile. When we can take the time and space to make space for ourselves, like we are people, we prove to ourselves that we are people and that we matter and that what we're doing matters and that the work matters, that we're all of it, like it, self-abdication, value of yourself, self-worth, all of that is a foundational piece that when we were kids was cracked. When we were kids, we were given tiny little separate pieces that didn't cohesively come together because we had so many different treatments telling us these lies that you're not lovable, you're not worthy, you don't matter. Why would I? Right? Like that vibe. We have all these fragments and we have collectively pulled them together like they're truths and like this is what we have to live off of. But we've seen how that living off of that, things fall, things break, it's not where we want to be. The baseline of all of these broken little things that we've decided and lived and coped our life through this foundation of cracked lies comes down to we end up enacting and behaving like those things are true. We start treating ourselves the way that other people treated us. And part of this journey of healing is taking one little broken piece of our foundation and just putting it aside. And that's part of why it can feel so painful, because before we can even build the foundation of what truth is, we have to break apart and kind of rescend down to the get rid of the lies that existed there. One of these foundations of how we enact it, how we live it out, and how we can more quickly break apart the lies and rebuild our foundation is through showing up for ourselves, is by discontinuing the actions of self-abdication, is by coming to the table with grace and love and compassion for ourselves. If judgment and shame, denigration, perfectionism, if they will work, if they would make our lives better, they would have done so already. I would love if you today took the time at some point today, when you observe at the end of the day, when you're thinking about the rest of the day, when it's happening, when you have this observation of something you did today that you didn't like, if you could stop in the midst of berating yourself and think about yourself like you would your best friend, like you would your child, and then start and say out loud or write it down what you would say to your best friend, what you would say to your child in that situation. We're people too. Let's show up for ourselves.